I was 18 when my father looked me in the eyes and said, "You are no daughter of mine." It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Cold. Final. Like he was closing a door that would never open again. My mother stood beside him, silent, her lips pressed so tightly together that they turned white. My older brother, David, refused to meet my eyes. And just like that, I lost everything. It all started with a mistake. A moment of recklessness that became a wildfire, spreading rumors faster than I could stop them. One wrong decision, one scandal, and suddenly I wasn't Lena, the promising young woman with a bright future. I was Lena, the disgrace. In our family, in our social circles, shame wasn't forgiven. It was buried. And I was expected to bury myself along with it. They didn't care about my side of the story. They didn't care that I was just a scared, confused teenager who made a bad choice. To them, I had ruined their reputation. My father, a well-respected businessman with political ambitions, couldn't afford a daughter who was the subject of hushed conversations and judgmental stares. His solution was simple: erase me. They kicked me out that night. No money, no plan, just the clothes on my back and a heart shattered into pieces. I remember standing outside the house, staring at the front door, knowing I would never walk through it again. The air was cold, and the realization was even colder. I was alone. But if they thought I was going to disappear quietly, they were wrong. At first, survival was brutal. I slept on couches, worked miserable jobs, and skipped meals to make my rent. There were nights I wanted to give up, nights when the weight of rejection crushed me so completely I couldn't breathe. But something inside me refused to break. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to prove them wrong. Architecture had always been my dream. I didn't just want to build buildings, I wanted to create something lasting, something no one could tear down. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, clawing my way into an industry that had no room for someone like me. I studied endlessly, took every opportunity, and ignored every voice that told me I wouldn't make it. Years passed, and slowly, I built a name for myself. Not just any name, a name that mattered. Projects with my signature were in magazines, my designs were reshaping city skylines, and the same people who once whispered about my disgrace were now whispering about my success. And then, one day, my phone rang. It was my mother. After nearly a decade of silence, she spoke as if nothing had happened. "Lena, sweetheart, it's been too long. We need to talk." I could hear it in her voice. This wasn't a reunion. This was something else. They didn't want me back. They wanted something from me. And I was ready for them. I stared at my phone long after the call ended, my mother's voice still echoing in my ears. It had been almost 10 years. 10 years of silence, of pretending I didn't exist. And now, out of nowhere, they wanted to talk? No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just a casual "we need to talk." I should have ignored it. I should have laughed and blocked her number. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself sitting in a high-end restaurant 3 days later, waiting. I had chosen the place on purpose, one of my own designs, a sleek, modern space that screamed power and prestige. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they discarded was now the architect of the very spaces they loved to be seen in. They arrived together, my mother and father, walking in like they owned the place. My father, still as stiff and polished as ever, barely looked at me as he sat down. My mother, in her pearl necklace and expensive perfume, gave me a rehearsed smile. "Lena," she said warmly, like I was a long-lost friend, not the daughter they had abandoned. "You look, well." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Let's skip the small talk. Why am I here?" A flicker of irritation passed over my father's face before he smoothed it over. "Straight to business, then." He adjusted his cufflinks. "Fine. We need your help." Of course they did. "David is running for office," my mother explained, her voice all sugar. "City council. It's a competitive race, but with the right support, he has a real chance." I let out a short, humorless laugh. And what does that have to do with me? My father finally looked at me then, his eyes sharp. Your name carries weight now. People admire you, respect you. If you endorse him, if you use your connections, it could make all the difference. I stared at them, hardly believing what I was hearing. After all these years, after everything they had done to me, they wanted me to help them climb higher? I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Let me get this straight. You threw me out like garbage. You cut me off, ignored me for years, and now that I'm successful, you suddenly remember I exist? And not because you regret what you did, not because you want a relationship, but because I'm useful to you? Lena, it's not like that, my mother said quickly, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. My father, ever the politician, kept his expression neutral. What happened in the past is done. We made mistakes, you made mistakes. But now we have a chance to move forward. To rebuild. To rebuild, I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue. You mean use me? My father's patience was thinning. This isn't personal, Lena. It's politics. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. You're right. It's not personal. Then I leaned in, lowering my voice. It's business. And I don't do business with people who betray me. My mother gasped softly, as if she hadn't expected me to say no. My father clenched his jaw. Think about it, he said stiffly. We're giving you a chance to be part of this family again. I smiled, slow and sharp. Funny. I wasn't aware I needed your permission to exist. I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table, even though I had no intention of paying for their meal. This was fun, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Let's do it again in another 10 years. Then I walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving them sitting in the ruins of the empire they tried to erase me from. But as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I wasn't done. If they thought I was just going to walk away and forget this, they had another thing coming. They wanted me back in their lives? Fine. I was about to make them regret it. I spent the next week carefully crafting my plan. This wasn't just about saying no, I wanted them to feel the weight of their mistake, to watch everything they had built tremble under the pressure of their own hypocrisy. I started by making calls. A few well-placed conversations with influential people in the city, developers, investors, media contacts. I wasn't reckless, I was precise. If my family wanted to use my name, I'd make damn sure it came with consequences. Then came the public statement. I knew they were waiting for my endorsement, expecting me to fall in line like a well-trained pawn. Instead, I issued a press release announcing my latest project, a massive affordable housing initiative in direct contrast to David's campaign, which catered to the elite. The timing was no accident. The media picked it up instantly. Headlines swirled about the estranged daughter of the Hartwell family making waves in the city. Interviews followed, where I made sure to subtly remind the world exactly who my family had deemed unworthy all those years ago. I never badmouthed them outright, I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. The real fun started when my brother's campaign began to suffer. My name carried more weight than theirs now, and people noticed. Donors started pulling back, unsure of whether they wanted to be associated with someone whose own sister refused to support him. Then, just as David's numbers were slipping, I delivered the final blow. A charity gala. The biggest of the year, hosted by some of the wealthiest and most powerful figures in the city. Invitations were exclusive, but, of course, I was on the list. So was David. I made sure to arrive at the perfect moment, right when the press was at its peak. Dressed in a sleek, custom-designed gown, I stepped into the room like I owned it. Because, in a way, I did. The whispers started immediately. People stared. My name was on everyone's lips. David saw me from across the room, his expression a mix of anger and panic. I gave him a small, polite smile, the kind that said, "Checkmate." He stormed toward me, his voice low but furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I sipped my champagne, feigning innocence. "Enjoying the party." "You know what I mean," he hissed. You're sabotaging me. I tilted my head. Am I? Or am I simply succeeding in ways you never expected? His jaw clenched. Why are you doing this? I leaned in slightly, my voice a whisper only he could hear. Because you and I both know that I don't owe this family a damn thing. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, a journalist swooped in. Lena. A quick photo? I smiled for the camera, my brother standing stiffly beside me. The flash went off, capturing the moment forever. A headline would follow the next day, the sister who stole the spotlight. As I walked away, leaving him standing there in the chaos of his unraveling campaign, I felt no guilt. No regret. They had cast me out. They had underestimated me. And now, they were watching me rise while they fell. David's campaign crumbled faster than I expected. The damage wasn't just from me, it was their own arrogance, their own mistakes catching up to them. My refusal to support him had exposed the cracks in their carefully curated image, and once people started looking closer, they found more than enough dirt to bury him. It started small whispers among donors, questions in the press. Then, a leaked financial report revealed mismanaged campaign funds. A former associate came forward with a scandal about backroom deals. The perfect family, the perfect reputation, it was all rotting from the inside, and now the world could see it. And I watched it burn. But I wasn't done. I made one last move, something subtle, something only my father would understand. A personal meeting request, just him and me. No press, no cameras. He agreed, of course. He wasn't the type to back down from a challenge, and by now, he had to know this wasn't just about David. This was about all of them. We met in his office, large, imposing, filled with dark wood and expensive things meant to intimidate. I remembered sitting in that very chair across from him when I was younger, terrified of disappointing him. Now, I was the one holding the power. He stared at me for a long time before speaking. You've made your point. I smiled. Have I? He leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. David's campaign is over. Your little stunt ensured that. But you forget one thing, Lena. He gave me a small, knowing smile. We always survive. I laughed softly, shaking my head. That's where you're wrong. You always survive, by using people, by controlling them, by making sure they need you. But me? I leaned in, matching his energy. I don't need you. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? His expression didn't change, but I saw it, the flicker of realization. He had spent his life making sure everyone around him relied on him for power, for influence. And I had built my own. He exhaled through his nose, sitting back. What do you want, Lena? I pretended to think for a moment. An apology would be nice. His lips pressed into a thin line. We both knew that wasn't going to happen. So I gave him the real answer. I want you to know that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, you will never have control over me again. You will never use me, manipulate me, or erase me. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. You're more like me than you realize. I laughed. No, Dad. That's what scares you, I'm nothing like you. I stood, straightening my jacket. This was fun. Let's never do it again. And with that, I walked out, leaving him alone in his empire of fading influence. The confrontation with my father should have been the end of it. I had said my piece, delivered my blows, and walked away victorious. But victory wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. The truth hit me later that night, alone in my penthouse, staring at the city skyline I had helped shape. I had spent years building myself up, proving that I didn't need them, that I was stronger than they ever believed. And yet, here I was, still entangled in their mess, still burning energy on people who had thrown me away without a second thought. I thought revenge would feel like closure. It didn't. A few days later, my mother called again. This time, I answered. Lena, she said, her voice softer than before. Can we talk? I sighed. We already did. Not like this, she said quickly. Not in front of your father, not with all this political mess between us. Just you and me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe, neutral ground, somewhere that felt safe. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe I had just never noticed before. There was no practiced smile this time, no rehearsed pleasantries. Just tired eyes and a woman who, for the first time in a decade, looked unsure of herself. You really did it, she said after a long silence, looking down at the coffee cup between her hands. Everything you said you would. You made a name for yourself. I didn't respond. She inhaled sharply. I wanted to reach out so many times, you know. But your father. I held up a hand. Don't. Her lips pressed together. Lena, You were there that night, I interrupted, my voice steady but cold. When he told me I was no longer his daughter. You stood there, silent. You didn't stop him. You didn't fight for me. You let me go. Tears welled up in her eyes. I was scared. So was I said quietly. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. I thought he was right. That the only way to survive was to do what he wanted, to keep the family intact. I thought, maybe you would come back one day, and we could fix it. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. You didn't think that. You hoped I'd disappear. That I'd either come crawling back on my knees, or fade away so you wouldn't have to deal with me at all. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her carefully constructed world. The guilt. The regret. Maybe even love buried beneath years of cowardice. I was wrong, she whispered. Yeah, I said, leaning back in my chair. You were. She reached across the table, hesitating before placing her hand over mine. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze back either. I can't change what happened, she said. I can't undo what we did to you. But if there's any part of you that's still, her voice broke. She took a breath. I don't want to lose you forever, Lena. I looked at our hands, at the mother who had abandoned me and now sat across from me, hoping for a second chance. And I had a choice to make. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at our hands. My mother, this woman who had stood silent while I was cast out, was now sitting in front of me, asking for something she should have fought for years ago. A part of me wanted to walk away. To tell her that she didn't deserve a second chance, that she had made her decision the night she let my father erase me. But another part of me, the part that had spent years craving answers, whispered, what if? What do you want from me? I finally asked, my voice quiet but firm. She looked down, as if searching for the right words. I want to know you again, she admitted. Not for David. Not for your father. Just, you. I studied her carefully. If this had been any other time, if I hadn't already torn their world apart, I would have assumed this was another manipulation. But there was no agenda in her voice. No calculation. Just regret. And yet, regret wasn't the same as love. You know, I said slowly, pulling my hand away, for years, I told myself I didn't need any of you. That I was better off without you. I let out a slow breath. And I was right. She flinched but didn't look away. But that doesn't mean I didn't want you, I continued. It doesn't mean I didn't spend nights wondering why you didn't love me enough to fight for me. Why it was so easy for you to let me go. Tears slipped down her face, but I didn't stop. I built a life without you. I succeeded without you. And I will continue to do so, whether you're in my life or not. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. So if you're asking me to pretend that none of this happened, to be your daughter again as if nothing changed, then the answer is no. She swallowed hard, nodding slightly, as if she had expected that. But, I continued, surprising even myself, if you're willing to accept that I'm not the same girl you left behind, if you're willing to put in the effort to earn a place in my life, not demand it, then maybe there's a chance. Her breath hitched. Lena. I held up a hand. It won't be easy. You don't just get to walk back in and play mother. If this is real, you have to prove it. Not with words, but with actions. She nodded quickly, wiping at her tears. I will. I promise. I exhaled, feeling the weight of years of resentment, anger, and longing settle into something more manageable. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to peace. We sat there in silence for a long time, the past still between us, but not as insurmountable as before. Later that night, I stood in my apartment, looking out at the city, my city. I had built everything I had from nothing. I had taken their rejection and turned it into strength. And now, standing at the top, I realized something. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their approval. I had already won. And whatever came next, whether I let them back in or shut the door forever, would be my choice. For the first time in my life, I was truly free.